first, apart from telling everyone that he wasn't Scott Morrison, the only real commitments that Anthony Albanese made at last year's election were to raise real wages and to cut your power bill by $275 a year. Now, essentially, he said he could achieve the cut at to the power bill by massively increasing renewable power. Plus, he said there'd be 604,000 new green jobs, with Labor's plan to get emissions down by 43% by 2030 and to achieve net zero by 2050. And one of the ways Labor's been able to get away with their lie that renewables will make power cheaper is because on the face of it, it's got a ring of truth. After all, the sun's free and so is the wind. So you can understand voters, at least early on, buying Labor's spin. That is, of course, until the reality rolls out into a community where they live. Because to get to its target of 80% renewables by 2030, this means the installation of 22,000 new solar panels every single day, a large new wind turbine every single month for 7 years, plus building at least 10,000 kilometres of new transmission lines by 2030. Lines which Labor costed pre-election at some $80 billion. Now, we all know how this is turning out, don't we? I mean, far from falling, most people's power bills are actually up 20% over the past 12 months. The energy regulator is warning of blackouts this summer, and all the new renewables and the power lines have farmers and conservationists up in arms about the damage to prime agricultural land and the destruction too of our wildlife. Not to mention the beauty of our landscape and oceans marred by acres of wind towers that we've just left to rust in place after their usual life of 15 years. Now, the latest looming failure in this energy policy train wreck is electric cars. Pre-election, Labor told us that 89% of new vehicle sales would be electric by 2030. Why this was something for emissions obsessives to boast about is a mystery, given that these are largely coal-fired cars, because coal is still 60% of our power supply, don't forget. But like all Labor's energy policy commitments, this one too is turning out to be a pipe dream. In the Senate recently, a senior transport official said that new car sales are now expected to be just 27% electric, not the 89% boasted by the government at the end of the decade. If that. The forecaster, RepuTex, this is the forecaster, of course, that Labor relied on pre-election, now tells the Australian newspaper today that EVs will only be somewhere between 20 or 30% of total car sales by 2030. So much for the modelling that they put their faith in pre-election. Mind you, of course, this is the same mob that Labor used who went out there and said they could save you $275 off your power bill. So RepuTex ain't that reputable. But you can see where this is all heading, can't you? Despite high fuel prices and despite tax concessions, people aren't buying electric cars in the numbers needed because they're roughly double the cost of conventional vehicles. And of course, they need lengthy charging every couple of hundred kilometres. So what will Labor do? Bring in fuel efficiency standard, I suspect, that will take most petrol and diesel cars off the market. That's the threat. In other words, force you into electric cars, whether you like it or not, whether they work for you or not. But this is modern Labor. Inner city elites who barely drive 10Ks a day, if that, preferenced over people in the suburbs or regions who need to drive greater distances just to get to work or live life. And as for anything becoming cheaper under Labor, well, forget it. The only player who ends up ahead here is China, because it's their cars, their solar panels, their wind turbines that we will pay billions and billions to import, giving their workers jobs using our coal and our gas to power their factories. The very same resources, of course, that we can't use here because we're so obsessed about emissions. Australia, don't forget, we're responsible for around 1% of global emissions. And China, well, far and away, they're the world's biggest emitter. Now, if our Prime Minister can't even take China to task for injuring our naval personnel, honestly, what hope do we have to win the looming economic or energy war?